Hey everybody, it's Chris. Today's episode is part of our new expert series, which is essentially my continued learning in real time and in public. And I'm picking the brains of experts in a topic that I've been digging into that can help us all become better climbers. If you're new to this series, we pretty often end up using terminology and discussing concepts that you may not have come across yet. So I'll be breaking in periodically to explain things a little better or to relate them to climbing in a way that makes more sense than what we did in the original interview. So when you hear this sound, that's me breaking in for an annotation of some sort. Today's guest is Udo Neumann, or as you might have heard of him, Udini. The first I knew of Udo was almost certainly in the summer of 1995, not long after I started climbing. His book, Performance Rock Climbing, co-authored with American legend Dale Goddard, was one of the first climbing training books I ever read. Throughout the 90s, Udo was a constant in media, especially at the advent of online video sharing, and in teaching, coaching, and learning about the movement of climbing as well. He was the German national team coach from 2009 to 2017, and he had several European and world champion athletes during his time there. Today, he advises federations and works with athletes and coaches all over the world. And in this episode, we discuss his ideas around motor learning and coaching movement, whether a coach needs to be as good as the athlete, how he assesses climbers, what makes Janja Garnbret and Tomoa Narasaki special, and I pick his brain about what makes the Japanese team so good. All right, let's get into it. Yeah, I think that's a big part of learning in public for me is the feedback from other coaches and other climbers. You mentioned that you sort of started coaching because Dale wasn't feeling like he was ready and you helped him prepare. And certainly one of my first introductions to training for climbing and really trying to improve at it was performance rock climbing. And I recently just got another copy of it. My first copy I stole from a library in Cincinnati. I just never took it back. And I paid the $3 fee so I could keep the book.
Okay.
And now I just got another copy from a friend who was giving away all of their dad's old books, actually. And they had a really nice copy of it. So I'm like, that's mine. I'm keeping that. But that came out in 1993. And it was one of the first books on how to train for climbing. And I have two questions since you've kind of been in the game for that long. First off, I've been thinking a lot lately about how we've maybe, in the overall sense anyway, or especially in the internet sense, overemphasize the physical training aspect. And I'm a big fan of it. I like physical training as much as anyone else. But I feel like we might have overemphasized it and underemphasized movement and performance coaching. And what I want to know is, since your book went pretty deep into the physical side of things, do you think that's true that we've overemphasized it first off?
Absolutely. But I can tell you the whole story. And I was about to write my master's thesis after studying physical education or sports science nowadays. And then my girlfriend at the time wrote her thesis about psychoregulation in gymnastics.
Oh.
But I really wanted to do something like this for climbing. And then I was standing in my garden with Dale, and I tell Dale about my plans, and then Dale goes why are you not writing something about what people are interested in? Write something about the real training, something hands-on. And so I wrote basically my master's thesis is about key performance indicators in competition climbing at the time. And this is where all the foundations, like the capillarization, the training ideas, this is where it all comes from. And I think performance rock climbing has for example, with the inner triad, and these things like the mental aspects, I think it aged well.
I agree.
it's actually just the part with the engrams and the motor learning, what we're talking about today, that I would write totally different nowadays. But at the at the time, and it's still, I mean, it makes a difference if you're into the science of it all, and if you want to get things really right, then it's not right for me right now, where I am right now. But all the other aspects is also in terms of people understanding what you write about, like the mental aspects, for example. It's okay. It's no.
Yeah, when I was just looking back through it, preparing for this, and it really did strike me how current it still seems. And I've been thinking about maybe it would be fun to do, sort of 20 years later or 30 years later reviews on some of these old books that we have, and talk about how relevant they still are. So that's fascinating. You've been on this sort of like movement path since the beginning, and that was just sort of Dale's suggestion to include all of this other stuff.
It was also a little bit, I mean, the process with Dale was fantastic, we were really like this, but it was all, so from the start on, when we first climbed together in the Verdun, was also a boy from Europe and a boy from the States. There were certainly things like, I mean, I don't want to call it marketing or so, but maybe just a more like I was really naive in many things at the time, and Dale had a much better concept, like write something not for yourself, but something people are interested in. Whereas at this point in my life, I would be very happy to just write about my inner feelings towards climbing, and not really like almost like an author film, like one of these really hard to digest European films from the 70s or so. Yeah.
Well, I think having Dale involved definitely made it. It got pushed to us more in America, because Dale was a superstar back then, so I wanted to read what he had been writing about. So that's very cool. You mentioned that the pieces about engrams and muscle memory and the motor learning are something that you would change now. And I want to dig into that. I mean, that's mostly what we're talking about here. And that's sort of how I was learning about movement as well. From the information processing side, I think that's the easier side to sort of understand, because we already have this idea of, memory and this like Rolodex of moves we can pull out and things like this. And we think that's the way the brain works, is I've learned that thing, I can pull it out of my brain whenever I want it. But now you've sort of changed your approach, and you're far more on the ecological side.
Yeah, what's really a little bit unfortunate is that when I was studying, Nikolai Bernstein was already discussed, but the translation into German was so terrible, it was so cryptic, that nobody really could make sense of it. But since, like, for example, degrees of freedom and repetition without repetition, there was already a thing, but the context in the 80s, I didn't really, couldn't connect the dots.
Okay, there's a lot to cover here. I'll try to keep it short. Nikolai Bernstein was a Soviet neurophysiologist who's sometimes called the father of motor learning, or the father of biomechanics, which is a term that he coined. He's perhaps most famous for his ideas that now contribute to the ecological theories of motor learning that we've been exploring here. In particular, repetition without repetition and degrees of freedom. We learned about repetition without repetition in the Rob Gray episode, but I'll quickly recap here in climbing terms. Essentially, we think that we're doing a move the same way every time, but in reality, we aren't. As we start a move, we might not lead as much with our hips, or we pull harder with our right arm, or we let go to move our hands sooner, or the humidity's higher, or we're more fatigued, or our trajectory is slightly off. And we adjust, which changes the move slightly every single time. We repeat the outcome, sticking the hold, but never the actual movement. Hence, repetition without repetition. The degrees of freedom problem is simply the idea that in order to complete a new or novel movement goal, there are any number of ways it can be solved. And I don't mean beta here. I mean that when doing a move, you could drive more from your legs, pull harder from your arms, keep your hips closer to the wall or further away. You could go slow or go fast, and all sorts of other variations. And these are just successful variations. A beginner may come up with who knows how many unsuccessful ways to attempt a move. So these are the degrees of freedom, all these possible ways you could choose to try to do the move. And the problem is how to choose. It's theorized that when initially learning a new skill, we freeze some of these degrees of freedom so that there isn't as much to explore within the solution space. And in climbing, this often results in what looks like tighter, more hesitant, more controlled climbing that lacks rhythm and momentum.
Yet, because nowadays I think it's much like when you say easier, it's a much also more helpful concept for coaches.
Yeah, I think so.
It's actually really, I don't want to call it easy, but once you get the idea, it's very hands-on, something to look for. Like how people release their degrees of freedom or unfreeze their degrees of freedom.
Yeah.
And I think even for performance rock climbing, it would make much more sense because there would be better examples, and it doesn't have this black box of or this governor side of it,
right?
Which is, I think, even more contrived. I see it almost as like when I was studying, it seemed to be something that you had to learn, and then you had to basically all these funky diagrams, that don't make sense at all. And at this time, you just felt, as a student at least, you felt, okay, I have to learn the diagram because this is what it is. And then later, I got like when Nikolai Bernstein's work got translated into English, you're like, okay, this is a much better.
Yeah. That's sort of how I came across it as well. I had always learned in the information processing way, and I think we've sort of been, maybe tricked is not the right word, but that's the path we've been led down because that's how education sort of works. We memorize these things and then we take a test, and now we've learned. And memorization is not necessarily learning. I think those two things have been conflated. But when I started to learn about ecological dynamics, I had the same experience as you, going, oh, well, this makes more sense. It's not, I had always thought of information processing sort of as metaphoric. Yeah. That there's this metaphoric brain in our or computer in our brain. It's not actually a computer. It's not actually a Rolodex, So when I started hearing these ideas of our movement or, our actions are always connected to our environment, that just made so much more sense to me. And I've spent a lot of time now trying to connect all of my old information processing ideas to ecological dynamics and trying to make sense of it within climbing. And Rob Gray has been a big help with that. I've spent a lot of time talking to him and, bouncing ideas around. So so I think for me, it makes way more sense.
Yeah, same here. And again, like when I was studying, I told you I did a lot of dancing and miming even, it was called movement theater and improv theater. And we did this stuff there. We didn't have the word, and I certainly didn't think of Bernstein's work, but for example, our dance teacher, she was telling us, we were always moving on the floor. We only did floor work, And when we were I'm a shit dancer, so it didn't matter to me so much. It was less ridiculous, so I almost was happy. But some of the other students were like, "Come on, when are we actually doing the real thing?" And she would always tell us, "This is too much freedom for you. You cannot handle this amount of freedom." And it's exactly the constraints-led approach, if you think about it, So. In these things like mine, certainly improv theater, and so this all was from the get on, it was also really accepted that it would be the ecological. It wasn't like, okay, this is a funky new theory. It was more like, yeah, this is how they go about these things.
Right. Right. Well, I think the first time I noticed that you were doing things differently was a video of the German team in deliberate play. And it was like they were, crawling up and down handrails on the stairs and just doing all these interesting, solving these interesting movement puzzles. And so many of us start this way in climbing. I remember I worked at a gym in Cincinnati, Ohio, and after hours, when the gym was closed, we would come up with all these interesting, play scenarios. And at the time, we were running across the slab and then jumping off of the slab onto the vertical wall and trying to catch things, or jumping into a crack and trying to land in it and hold it. And then we sort of moved away from that because we were training our fingers instead. Yeah. And now I look at World Cup competition climbers and they're running across slabs and jumping onto things. And it looks exactly like the deliberate play we were doing back then. So I want to know, like, where is your current thinking on this idea of deliberate play, and how does it fit into making a better climber?
Basically in anything, like even if you want to strictly going back to, if we place too much emphasis on the physical side, I mean, if you want to get full engagement of from a teenager, you're not going to get this by just talking and rationalizing about it. Now you have to put this person into as much of a engaging situation as possible. And this, for example, when we did this movement theater or improv theater, there would be, like, for example, a poem or a piece of music, and then you would act or play according to this. And this is a little bit what I'm still doing all the time. There's a lot of storytelling, like there's a certain narrative. And okay, I don't know if when I started with the German team, just how ridiculous this can be. I don't know if you remember the not very fantastic show Burn Notice with the secret
I do
agent.
Actually.
Yes, I do. Yes. Okay, that's just how I don't shy away of really ridiculous things. Like this was on German TV, and it's about the secret agent who gets a. I didn't know the term burn notice. So basically, if the secret agency basically doesn't employ you anymore, you get a burn notice. And he's stranded in Miami. And then he has to solve all these things. It's a little bit like MacGyver for the people that haven't seen this. And so, and at least in the German translation was always like, if you're in an impossible situation, you have 3 options. And the first 2 years we were with the Boulder team, we were talking like this. So basically the situations this guy would find themselves in, we totally talked the same about Boulder problems. And we made all this because it's very often it's really ridiculous. Like he gets himself out of a hairy situation by just chewing up. I mean,
right?
But it was basically about having this spirit and approaching a Boulder World Cup with the same spirit.
I love that.
And so it would be full of that. There is always, there's always some kind of story. Like even nowadays, this girl Xenia, she's stranded in Cologne. She's a refugee from Ukraine, and from the beginning on, because she's 17, really well humored and really happy to play along. And from the beginning on, I was telling her, Xenia, no pressure, but your life depends on it. And then you get these big eyes like this at the beginning, but it becomes like, so everything we do is really intense, and there are always consequences. Like if you drop the mat ball, you have to do something ridiculous, or there will be some fun consequences. So again, it's getting even worse. If you had any hope that I would be more mature now, no.
You're going the opposite direction at this point. I love it. Do you think that play is more? And I'm asking this because I think there's this idea that because the current version of competition climbing looks more like play or looks more like parkour, we might think that play is more advantageous for the competition climber than it is for the outdoor climber. And I don't think that's necessarily true, but I'm curious your thoughts around it.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to talk about closed and open skill continuums. So if you consider like rock climbing, project climbing, red point climbing more on the close, then yeah, you could have a point, that maybe not so much play is, but that's also if you try to figure out things by yourself, or if you do a multi-pitch route where the crux didn't have 100 YouTube videos, you almost have to figure it out. And then I think it's very advantageous if you can think out of the box and you have I mean, as John Cleese, the Monty Python guy, said, creativity is not a skill, it's a practice. And it's a little bit so. I think when we play, we have to think on our feet. We have to make quick decisions. I think that's advantage. Apart from it being also more fun, I think that like it's good for everybody.
Yeah, I think one of the things I feel like I've developed through deliberate play on boulders, where I'm just coming up with fun, interesting beta that is certainly not the most efficient way to do it. Though sometimes I do come up with something that seems more efficient, but I'm playing and trying to find new solutions. And what happens then is I've developed this new vision to see more affordances in whatever this solution space is. And then when I'm up on a red point and I'm hanging at or I'm up working on a project and I'm hanging at a bolt, I can see more solutions that are possible rather than I watched a video on the ground. This is the way to do the move. I'm having a hard time with it. And then you spend a bunch of attempts and a bunch of days finding your own solution. And I think we can develop the ability to do that faster through playing.
Yeah. And there's also, I mean, there are many other aspects to it. Like nowadays you have so many kids that are really perfectionists and and they're really focused on the goal. I mean, I don't blame him. If you're a young person, you might not have this perspective, like the process and screw the process. I want to be there now.
I just want to be at the end right now.
So you cannot expect it. Yeah, of course. I see this, but then it's a lot easier to, even the coaching is a lot easier if you don't carry this or always this weight, like, and sometimes, and it's also like, basically it goes on in regardless what you're interested in, where the people are that you're coaching. I think it's a much better approach, like from the engagement. Like, for example, if we chase each other, we give it all. We're totally in the moment, and there's no planning, and it's also really enjoyable. It's really a flow state, and you don't get this by telling them, look, I want you to climb or whatever, do this 100%. It's not the same thing, like in terms of engagement. But there's also, even on the motor learning, I don't know how familiar you are with differential learning.
Yeah, I am a little bit. I actually just talked with Taylor Reed about this a little as well. It's a fascinating concept.
Yeah, it's a German guy, and it's really, I mean, the way he explains it is rather complicated, or I shouldn't say complicated, but you need some education to really understand all his argument. But and they're like related. I mean, it's really important for him that he doesn't want to see it along the same lines as contrast learning, and so basically. But the idea in my mind, it's still a little bit to maybe suggest to do something deliberately wrong. And you see this, for example, in Adam Ondra, not so much nowadays, but a couple of years ago at the Boulder contest, he would try say this thing looks like something that could be done dynamically with a crazy jump, or maybe it's also possibly totally controlled statically. Then he would try one idea, maybe a crazy jump. Then he would try the opposite of it, and then he would zero on whatever he learned from these two really different approaches. And that's alone, like if you're dealing with a really introvert, maybe super nervous, anxious teenager, that's just good advice, to just follow plan A, as crazy as it might seem, and then try the opposite. And then just see what's happening.
I think that's so important, and it's doing a bunch of things, by practicing both sides of the equation. You think it goes this way, but let's try it this way.
Yeah.
You're also building up this on-the-wall awareness that they can then reflect on once they're back on the ground and say, okay, what happened in this scenario? What happened in this scenario? How did I feel in each of those scenarios? What seems like the way that's going to work the best? And they come to the solution that works a little faster. You said something in the beginning of all that I think is really important as well. And that's that, we have this goal, especially kids learning to climb, teenagers learning to climb. The goal is like to get to the top or to clip the chains or to win the comp or whatever that is. And I think if we can shift that goal and make it more about how you did the move or, some other goal. And I think play does this in a really interesting way. It like takes the top of the boulder out of the goal. And the goal just becomes, let me do this interesting, fun move here. Let me stick this fun thing I just imagined in my head or whatever. And I think that serves a really great purpose in shifting the goal and taking it away from the outcome of the competition or whatever.
Yeah, one example is, and you see this a lot in youth competitions, when they make the athlete really make an effort to show their coaches and maybe their parents and the audience how close they get with the hand to the hold. But nowadays, if your center of gravity is far away, you're not going to be able to make contact with the hold, to control the hold, and this is almost a little bit about delayed gratification, but this is just human nature, So, like in this regard, what you just said, it could be all about the hip. So the goal would be not reaching the hold, but to throw the hip against the wall or something, So for me, I'm not a huge fan of like explicitly talking about like the quality of movement. It feels really uncomfortable. And it's also a really tough argument, especially with adolescent boys, because they like once they've done the climb, it puts you in a really lame spot to, Jan, but you did it, but couldn't you do it a little bit prettier or a little bit more smoothly? No. Then I much rather reframe the task and say, look, now you cannot use, I tied your hands to the back, and now let's see how you do it now.
Putting a constraint into place to lead them into whatever solution you're looking for. I agree. I think there's a emotional value system when we start talking about how pretty a move was or how quality of movement. I'm certainly guilty of this, but I think we teach people to value the smoother, more in control moves and not to value either the like scrappy fight or it used to be that dynamic moves weren't valued because they weren't in control, so to speak, And I think that's a big problem with talking quality.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but ultimately, is about arriving at the top, at least on the
Yeah.
performance. And I
Yeah.
think we have to keep this in mind. But again, for coaching, that would mean that you just focus and reframe on other aspects. That bring,
Yeah.
as I said, like for example, the hips, and then you have to be a little bit creative with the communication with the athlete.
Hmm.
Also, you don't have to tell them everything you're planning and thinking.
Yeah,
Uh, I'm,
absolutely.
I'm, I'm not the most honest person when I coach. Like,
Yeah, I think that's important. I'm curious how much information do you feel like you need to give? Is it different for different athletes? Say, does Jan Hoyer want more of the like mechanics of a move
no,
versus
no,
someone
no.
else?
No,
Or
no. Like for my observations or my experiences so far, like Jan Hoyer is a really good example. The guy is just like I told you at the beginning with secret agents or detectives, that
yeah.
totally resonates. Like, and he also
Mm,
when we were like when he was his strongest, he was really fascinated by the NBA, and he was watching all the games and all the hustling, in basketball, and like he was really into professional basketball, and also
mm,
the mental aspects of it, especially like putting yourself on the line, being able to perform under
right. With the
difficult
pressure.
situations. Now, and we had, I don't know if you were in Vail in 2015 when he won against Adam Ondra.
I was
Well,
not. I was not.
okay, because Adam Ondra did in this comp, he did. At the time, he said that was his hardest competition boulder, like the second, I think, with the flat holes. Really
Hmm.
hard, and Jan didn't have a chance. And through all these years, we totally knew that Adam is by far the superior climber. But
Mm.
Adam is not a good competitor. Adam doesn't understand sports. And so
Right, right.
no, it's true. I mean, there's nothing bad, nothing to be ashamed of. Like
Yeah,
Adam
yeah.
started climbing, whereas Jan is really into the like playing the game. Seeing, okay,
Hmm.
this is uh, within the rules. I'm doing nothing against the rules, outside the rules, but I see, I have recognized there's a certain gray area that I'm going to
Yeah,
exploit.
yeah.
And like just in, for example, not getting, you've done already, maybe on your first attempt, you reach the zone on the compression problem. And then why do another attempt if you're not, if it's maybe the first problem and you have 4 more to go? And this takes some nerves to do, because the audience is expecting it. So I was even told by some coaches to tell Jan that this is not sportsmanlike, to
Mm.
wait on the mat, and but this was what Jan was interested in. We in 2015, especially, we had quite a few of discussions, and one thing was also that basically I'm not a good enough climber to coach him. And then I would
Mm.
always say, like, you look, Jan, that only leaves Adam in the world for you to be your coach. Like, what are you talking about? Huh?
Yeah,
And this is also something in climbing that's not like in football. I mean soccer, of course, but I still call it football.
yeah.
Like, in football, nobody would expect from a coach
Right.
to, like, or even Roman, for example, Janja's coach, he's not even a climber. So just in climbing, people really cling on to the idea that basically the coach has to be able to demonstrate the world-class climber how to do a move.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, I've
if this
always
is
thought that was really interesting that climbers cling on to that idea because we can look at almost any other sport. Muhammad Ali's coaches never fought around in their life. Michael Phelps' coach was not a gold medal swimmer.
yeah,
All of the best athletes in the world. How can you
man.
be the best athlete in the
Yes,
world if your coach is better than you?
of course, and it
That's not
puts
how it
all.
works.
It's really stressful for young coaches. I just a couple of days ago I had a discussion here for this project I might be starting, and a lot of coaches feel are really not confident because especially boys start to argue and question their authority. And it is totally, I mean, if you're somehow talented and you're 12, I expect you to climb circles around me I mean, maybe next week, you know, like I really hope so. You know, there's I mean, if I can, for example, still juggle a little bit better than you, then I might enjoy this from time to time, but definitely not in climbing or in the activity.
Yeah, absolutely. Even at the crag, if I see a 12-year-old girl at the crag, my immediate thought is, I want to watch her today because I'm going to learn something. She's certainly a better climber than I am.
Of course, yeah, of course.
Something I've been like struggling myself with lately, Udo, is we sort of use the words technique and skill interchangeably, and I'm moving away from that in that I'm trying not to lead with technique and lead with saying, this is a drop knee, this is a heel hook. You know, that's how you do this move, because I think that sort of pushes people away from exploring the space for themselves. So I'm trying to, I think a technique is a one solution to a movement problem. And that skill is more the ability to adapt. And I think adaptation is far more important, and that's what we should be aiming for.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And another way to think about it is the skill is almost the principles, you know, the like how to force on opposition or whatever, you know, like the underlying biomechanics or physics, the principles. And so this is really important, but there are not so many principles, and they're even somehow easy. And then the technique is, as you said, you know, is the solution, the particular solution. But this is not half as valuable as the principle. You know, this is also the part that would be maybe entirely different if you would just twist the hold. You know, or the hold is suddenly it's wet. You know, now what? You know, and so I think that to talk about technique as a climbing coach, it just puts you also in a really awkward position, I think.
You know, I keep going back to this moment that I had with actually I was with my coach Nate, and we were doing a workshop, and there was this really young, really small girl. She was probably 9 years old or something. And we were just talking to her about a problem she was looking at. And, you know, we're like, okay, what do you think you're going to do up there? And she explains this thing she's going to try. And both Nate and I looked at each other and we're like, that's not going to work. You know, we didn't say that out loud, but that was our thought. And then she climbs up there and she does it.
Okay.
Exactly the way she was explaining it. And I thought, you know what? I don't know enough about all the possible solutions to say this is this technique.
Absolutely.
They're going to find another way.
And again, this is really like, I really wonder why people hold on to all these concepts, because even Piaget, I don't know, like last century or even this 19th century, he said, he's a famous Swiss pedagogist. And he said, like, every time you tell a kid what to do, you basically rob him or her the opportunity to find it out him or herself. You know? And this is even this has the notion that what you would propose would be the right thing, what it might not be, you know. And also, I mean, we might, like, I recently watched a lot of gibbon footage again, and they're not really, like, genetically, they're not so different from us. And I think, like, maybe Janja would be okay in a gibbon family, you know, they would look down on her, but she's not, I mean, she gets along, we have to wait for her, but I mean, there's so much more as possible. So how are you going to coach this from the perspective, now how are you coaching Janja's kids? And even nowadays, you know, they're girls have been watching so many videos of Janja. A lot of what she introduced to climbing is just common sense nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
It's really like for the relationship between the coach and the athlete, you start working with them when you're most likely much more knowledgeable than they are. But then eventually, of course, and as they should, they should be reading boulder problems a lot better than you do. It should be.
Yeah, absolutely. I just put out a blog post where I sort of proposed this idea that we're not only robbing the climber of finding this unique solution, we're also robbing ourselves of a learning opportunity if we say this is the way to do it, and then they do it and they move on. Because I might get to see a whole new thing I never would have imagined if I let this person explore the solution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Since we're talking about skill, you mentioned earlier skill continuums and open and closed skill continuums, and I really like this distinction between these two types of skill continuums. Can we talk about that a little?
Of course, yeah. The main thing, is also something I've been thinking about skill continuums for a long time. Okay, just for the listener or viewer that doesn't know, it's the closed skills would be like gymnastics, figure skating, the diving. So things that stay pretty similar, it's not that you're going to a swimming pool in Australia and the swimming pool will be different. That's the whole point. It's very standardized. Right. It will be 50 meters. So very little variation.
Okay, let me define these a little bit tighter here. An open skill is performed in a constantly changing and unpredictable environment. And this change is usually the playing field that's constantly changing, or the weather, or an opposition that you can't predict. The simplest climbing analog is on-site climbing. A closed skill is performed in the same conditions every time, and in some ways, red point climbing is a closed skill, though competition speed climbing is probably the closest we have to a true closed skill. And that's because even with red point climbing, there are environmental condition changes as well as skin and body condition changes that will always affect the movement. So it's more of a continuum instead of a well-defined list. And it's understood that in general, open skills take longer to learn than closed skills. In the case of climbing, one of the reasons I've been pushing adaptability as the top skill for a climber is because it's the essence of open skills, but it also will allow you to more quickly choose from more options which skills you move into a more closed arena, like hard red pointing.
So the skill continuum happens on many different levels, if you want to call it like this. For example, like time constraints. Yeah, can you make an attempt whenever you want, or you have to climb at 3:00 sharp?
Right.
And you have to deal with this. Are there opponents? For example, in climbing, we don't have opponents.
Right.
So it's automatically more controllable, more same. And then you have, of course, things like surfing, where they would be on the full end of the open spectrum.
Right. Totally. Yeah. The terrain is constantly changing all the time. They have to continuously adapt.
And why I think this is valuable for every competitor or every coach, and I think it's maybe not considered enough, is that very often you see the performance of the athletes lacking exactly because of that. For example, the time constraints. If you never practice to be your best under time constraints, how likely is it that you can handle the stress?
Right.
Or for example, when we do a mock comp, very, very often we used to tell the athletes that we would start. I told you I'm not very honest necessarily. So we would tell them we start at 11:00. And then at 10:45 we would start, just to throw them off. And for example, the Japanese are doing this really to great length, to introduce some randomness and make them not too
make it so they can't anticipate the pressure the
yes,
way that we
exactly,
might otherwise.
no?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's something I've talked quite a bit about when it comes to like climbing trips. I think we get into this idea that we can cherry pick the days, cherry pick the conditions, wait until my skin is good. But that may not be the case if you're on a climbing trip. So it might be important for you to start introducing that sort of pressure into your climbing before you go on this trip so that you react better to, it's the last day of my trip. I have to get this thing done or I have to walk away from it. And introducing that pressure in your sessions earlier might prepare you better for that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, and even like, and you touched upon this like earlier. You said like when we were talking about like how pretty you climb, how beautiful your solution is and your movements and how smoothly and so. Very often, like if you nowadays a lot of climbers, if you're in the man-made environment all the time, they lack the ability to climb dirty very often. And now, like, what as a rock climber for us, basically that was the only option to hang on whatever it takes, and you didn't get any style points for that. But now it's almost full circle. Now they climb really nicely, but then there is no apparent fight. And, they don't, it's the resilience that's maybe not really trained, like just being comfortable with being uncomfortable is something that needs to be practiced.
Yeah, I've said so many times recently that I think adaptability is the most important skill a climber can have. More important than the finger strength that everyone is focused on is the ability to adapt to humidity or skin condition or fatigue or pressure or all of these things that get thrown in that are constantly changing. I don't want to have to wait until everything is perfect to do the thing.
But it gets like a really like you're also from a different time, Chris. We are getting old, like. But if you grew up in a man-made environment, no, honestly, it's really a problem.
Yeah.
But even what you said before, how you after climbing, you came up with all these crazy play games, and this. Nowadays, I mean, the gyms are so fantastic nowadays, but you don't have to think. You don't have to be creative at all. It's all handed to you. And fair enough, it's all good. But how can you come up with something original and with you have to practice thinking on your feet. If you really want to rely on this.
You recently posted about adaptability and optimism bias, and I feel like that's sort of what we're leading into here. So, talk to me a little about what optimism bias is when it comes to adaptability.
Yeah. I was a little bit surprised that I wrote this down myself, but it seemed to fit. But really, I mean, the cognitive biases are really. Do you know this huge graphics where they list I think it's on Wikipedia, and it's really nicely woven into a huge graphic with 450 cognitive biases. I can send you the link. Maybe it's super interesting because
I'd love to see it.
Basically, you go through the 450 biases, and we've all been there.
For sure.
I mean, there shouldn't be the impression that some people have like this bias. We're all biased, and it's also really helpful. It's very efficient to have certain biases. But with the optimism bias, I guess, from my experience, there is a lot of denial. It's basically the notion like I know that I'm not good enough on slabs, but I just hope that there won't be any slabs. That would be important. I know for sure.
Yeah,
I know, and
totally,
you would be surprised of how many competitors. And again, going back to Jan, that would be also something Jan would be gambling on. But he was deliberately. We had these big arguments where he would say like, look, Udo, if I put any effort in improving my slab game, by 2%. It will take me so much effort. So I much rather do this and this and this, and it will really be helpful. And he had a point there, but Jan at least knew about these things. But very often I find that, like, even the coaches, it's basically, this is why I guess this is why I wrote Optimism Bias. It's like basically, you're just hoping, that.
Right. I see this in outdoor rock climbers all the time as well, where if I'm helping someone prepare for an objective, or to be a better climber, to red point something harder or whatever, they might say, I don't want to learn slab climbing. All my stuff is steep pocketed projects, so I don't want to learn to climb on slabs. But inevitably, they're going to go get on some classic route that they really want to climb, and there's going to be a hard slab move up at the top before they clip the chains, and they're going to get really frustrated by it because they've spent no time slab climbing. So even the things that we think we don't need to learn are going to translate better into what you're doing outside or in comps as well.
Yeah. And also the whole, like, the mental or cognitive side of it. Like, I could imagine, like, if you have this mindset, you pull from one pocket to the next, and this is what climbing is. You pull on things. But also, if you watch like Alex Megos, or like all the high end rock climbing, first of all, how fast they climb, and how little pulling there is actually nowadays. Of course, but like you're not getting anywhere if you pull on the hold, and like as you do in training, and this is all you do, and you totally neglect your hips, and so there's a limit. You certainly won't be climbing 9B with this technique
for sure.
And it's also really like what the cognitive, like I really like even the stupid marshmallow test and the whole delayed gratification is so important in climbing.
Now, you've probably heard of this, but just a quick reminder, the Stanford Marshmallow experiment is a study from 1970 that tried to determine when the control of delayed gratification developed in children. And in this study, a child was left in a room with a single marshmallow for about 15 minutes. And if they chose not to eat the marshmallow, they'd get that marshmallow plus another treat. In follow-up studies, it was suggested that those who were willing to wait for gratification tended to have better life outcomes. And it's gone through several important variations. A replication attempt with a sample from a more diverse population that was over 10 times larger than the original study showed only half the effect of the original study, suggesting that economic background, rather than just willpower, explained the other half. And most recently, in 2020, the predictive power of the marshmallow test was challenged, but it still remains one of the seminal studies on delayed gratification. And I say all of that because I think this idea that Udo asserts of delayed gratification in climbing is a really fascinating one. And it's probably something that's really important, especially for higher level sequencing.
Delayed gratification is so important in climbing, because the hold is there and you want to get to the hold. And it's also our hands are really well represented in our brain. So you're all hands. You live in your hand. And it seems to be the obvious thing. But then the rest of your body is didn't get the message.
Right.
And so you might be even fighting yourself, because you're so focused on your hand. And then, unfortunately, you might be even emphasizing on exactly this technique through your training. And then it's getting worse and worse, whereas it would be much better idea to, as I said, like this time it's only about the hips, and forget about the pocket.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about, the way we're strength training nowadays really does emphasize the hands, and it makes sense to do that, right? But at the same time, it's de-emphasizing all of the other aspects.
Yeah, and I think there is a strong, like if we talk biases, one is, for example, anchoring. That's basically the first thing you learn about the subject. This stays with you, and then you're almost defending it to new evidence. And I think it just comes from the sensation when we climbed the first time. Everybody has like pump forearms, and also the frustration is that we cannot hang on. And then if we would watch ourselves for 10 years, we've been climbing, and we would everybody would say, like, look, this dude just cannot climb, like he wasn't too weak, but he just didn't know how to move his body. But somehow we always think that from the position we're in right now, that's not true for us anymore. But I'm afraid it's always true. Like for me, it's really like the reason why. Of course, you have to be freaking strong, as strong as you possibly can be. But I haven't seen any boulder problem that was decided based on strength for a long, long time. Maybe like the last seasons, like for example with Natalia Grossman, you really see how much this can count. How valuable it is to be have a fantastic strength to weight ratio. But then it's also, in my thinking, is always maybe not the best route setting. That you
sure.
I think in the ideal world, you want to see the complete climber and not like one isolated aspect of this. But this is a different discussion.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important for this conversation too, because if we're outdoor climbers, there may be someone who can do the thing that we want to do using strength and power as their main solution. And we tend to bias toward that, especially right now, where all the information coming at us is you need to get stronger, you need to get stronger. But if we look at the top climbers, they are strong, but they're also really good at not using that strength when they don't have to. And I think that's the paradigm we should be looking at, rather than, this one person just campused up my project and he's really strong, so that's what I need to do. Instead, it's all of the best climbers in the world over all of time are also strong and also really good at moving and understanding how to find the solution that fits them best.
Yeah. It's almost like, for me, if an athlete talks like this, you already can tell that maybe the eye for movement is not yet very developed, or maybe they're just starstruck by this person who campused what they are projecting. Maybe it's that, but it doesn't show a high level of expertise, I must say. To hear this, because I mean, also there can be many different aspects of strength.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I think, for example, what makes if you just consider Janja, I would say Janja is the best human climber right now,
Sure.
Male or female. And
I could absolutely agree with that.
Just like two aspects of her climbing. Like first is like the way she is prepared for landing on a hold. So Janja jumps off, and then in mid-air, she's your regular girl, athletic girl, and then a fraction of a second before she hits the target hold, she doubles in size and muscles, and so she gets really, really big. So, and this is, of course, the anticipation. She knows what she is. She's already planning for the impact, whereas some, and then this is again a little bit maybe this optimism bias, like some people think, if I will be just get my hands close to the hold, things will happen by themselves. But no, that was maybe when we were jumping for jugs. You get away with it. Again, also with the rock climbing, this can work as long as you maybe, I'm sure that even there's some 13 B, C's, D's maybe where you jump to a jug, or where you climb juggy if it's steep enough. But then if it gets harder, eventually you will climb with holes where you have to be really aligned. You have to be really aligned. You want to be behind the hold. It's about loading the hold more than getting to the hold. So there's this aspect that Janja really anticipates significantly better than everybody else. The hold, and then also the almost in a way almost opposite thing, how she deals with absorbing the force and channels this, rebounds into the next movement. The whole what's called collision fraction. And this is almost in like in my mind, the first climber who really exploited this was Akio Noguchi.
Right.
And at this time, I know for sure that the German-speaking climbing world didn't understand what makes her so strong at all. Because it's force, certainly it's force, but it's the application is totally different than what most people associate with force.
Yeah. One of the things I really appreciate about watching Akio or Janja or Tomoa is the rhythm that they climb with is so different than the average climber. And I think we can look back to Yuji and Dai and see a similar rhythm in their climbing, or Fred Nicole had a different rhythm, but it was still very rhythmic in his climbing. And I think that's such an important part that gets missed a lot. For me, that's one of those big principles, but it gets missed.
Yeah, and even like the aspect of patience. I recently, I think I posted a story with Kilian, or was it a reel?
Yep.
And it was like, I remember one time only Rostam, who had 10 times stronger fingers than Kilian. Kilian was always really weak. And only these two climbed a problem in Innsbruck in the finals. And then I was filming from the side and was really surprised of how patient, like Kilian really waited for his body to swing out and then come in. But it wasn't like a dramatic swing. It wasn't like a crazy swing. It was really subtle. But he was waiting for him being, to use the counter movement to his advantage. And then I asked him about it, and he said, "Yeah, Udo, sometimes you need to be patient." So he clearly understood this. And this is also like a rhythm thing, to
Absolutely.
not hastily fight the rhythm, basically, have to do something,
Total aside here, but you bringing up Kilian popped this into my head. I have a really fond memory of climbing with Anna Stor and Kilian Fischhuber in the Red River Gorge. And I was working on what would become my first 514. And I ended up doing it back to back with Kilian and Michaela Kirsch. So a really, really fun day for me as a coach, getting to watch these really high level climbers climb on the same thing that I was on. It took them way less time than it took me, but it was fun to see the ways they approached it and the ways they climbed. And really, I loved watching Anna Stor. I had seen her climbing on boulders, competition boulders for a lot of my climbing career, but to get to watch her climb outside as well was really important for me, I think. Can we talk a little bit about how when you first encounter a climber or start working with a team, how do you assess their movement skills? Is there a framework you use? Do you go through a similar scenario every time? What's that look like in practice?
By now, I think I certainly have a framework. I look for certain things, but I'm really fluid in this. I always have great plans, but then I forget about them once I start. It's not working for me to really follow a plan. But like I mentioned, one thing is really the degrees of freedom and how well, like when I told you about this, the dance teachers we had, and one time we were just standing in the gym for 2 hours. 2 hours there, we were just standing on 2 feet, and then we were lunge forward. And the idea was to, like what I just said about Janja and Akio, it was like to basically to absorb this through all your body. So all your joints needed to be transparent. I don't know if this is that would be the literal translated, and the teacher always thought that they need to be durchlässig, so that would be transparent. So basically, that every joint does what this joint ideally does to absorb the impact of stepping forward. And we were super annoyed, by this. It was very mindful, something you hate in your early 20s as a boy. But was really not excited. But now, just recently, I did a couple of sessions with Hannah Moyle, and it's totally obvious how important this is for her slab climbing. Like if you look, I take for now, I don't want to. Hopefully nothing to do with cliches or so, but just some of like Oriane, a lot of the French girls, Hannah certainly, Janja of course, like they have such a subtle, like is it really like even if their pinky like maybe takes 1 gram of the swing, they will use it. So because I have my hands in front of the camera, it's easy to show. So basically, freezing degrees of freedom would maybe you have a claw, and the purpose for your brain is to not think about it. So this is what Nikolai Bernstein called freezing degrees of freedom. So you would be basically, this would be really rigid, and then your brain is free to think about other things. And you see this really often. This is, I think, a really nice first step to assess somebody's movement in how transparent. Especially if you ask this person to do a balance task, you will see some kind of roboter-like movements, some rigidness, stiff-leggedness. And then you see somebody like, for example, Hannah, and it will be like, like as long as she's in a good, as she is in a happy place, because this, this is important to keep in mind. This will be the first thing to go under stress. But this is a different chapter. But for assessment, I think that's a really good first start. To put them, give them just some random balance test, and then see how well they're coping. And this has nothing to do with them. Like maybe they have done slackline before, so they're really proficient in slacklining. So you have to find something that's new to them. Balance transfers not very well. So if we test one balance task, it might mean nothing for another balance task. It's not about that, but it's about like how do they go about it. So this being fluid and soft would be almost the right word. And this is something to look out for.
Yeah, the degrees of freedom is really interesting. I was coaching workshops long before I understood the ecological approach. And one of the drills we would ask these young climbers to do would be to try to climb with their feet as far away from their hands as possible, and to get really stretched out. And what I would see happen very often is at least half of the climbers would then have trouble bending their legs to move them to the next hold. And I would purposely say, you can bend your legs, you can walk around on holds to get further away and then reach, but they wouldn't bend their knees at all. They would have a hard time with that. And as I was learning about the ecological side of things and freezing degrees of freedom, it occurred to me, wow, by asking them to think about how stretched out can I be, they can no longer bend their knees because they've frozen the degree of freedom there in order to consider how long can I be.
This could be, this sounds like a really interesting assessment. And this is also what I would do. Maybe I would totally change the task, but it's a little bit along the same lines, that basically test them under different constraints. And then, again, another, or just a couple of other things, like very often, at least for the competition, but I'm sure also on rock climbing, the mental and cognitive side is a big part of it. And especially like any like anxieties. Like probably, and you see this from really early on, and might be a lack of commitment, or it can be anything. And then I think you owe it to the athletes to address this really early on. This is not getting any better if you deny it. And I think, I'm afraid this happens actually really often. So you see this person, and okay, he or she might look a little bit anxious, but then, okay, let's train, let's get her fingers, let's make her fingers really strong. But then, of course, we always, times of trouble, we look for what we think are our strengths. So this person will really cling on, and so you might have even done them a disservice.
A disservice, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'm curious, when you encounter these athletes who you see that there's, something that they're having trouble with, and as a coach, we want to lead them into a certain direction. I think when we're starting out, though, we think coaching is more explicit instruction, like telling them how to do the things. And I'm curious, with constraints being constraints aren't always a viable thing to add. Or they seem like they're not. They're tough for people initially, I think, is adding the correct constraints. So I'm curious how much you still give explicit instruction, or if you ever do, or if you keep it constraint-based.
I mean, honestly, I must really say, because I record a lot of my sessions, or almost at least time lapse running, so I see myself coaching, and I'm shocked and a little bit embarrassed of, regardless of how I pride myself of not explicit, but I think I still give a lot of explicit. In a way, it can be maybe packaged in what I said in this narrative, like this. I think I do this really often, but there's still a lot of explicit, like little cues or so, so they're not on their own, because it's also the sheer practicality is that I do some one-on-one coaching, but of course, eventually it gets really expensive, and then I don't want to have just clients with parents that can afford me coaching them, and so it's really, for me, I much rather have a nice group of people, and then you need to be a little bit more efficient with your coaching, and then you cannot be explicit with everybody. So it's even this aspect, I think, needs to be considered. Like ideally, the group coaches itself, and you're really just preparing the environment for them.
I think that's good for people to hear, and I mean, I feel good hearing that you are still giving explicit instruction more often than you think you should, because that's a thing that I struggle with as well. And I'm sure other coaches who are trying to, coach more along the constraints-led approach are also finding the same thing in their coaching.
Yes, but I really think it makes a huge difference, at least, or not at least, but certainly for teenagers. If you do this from top down, if you do explicitly coaching, and basically this is the way you prescribe the solution.
Right.
I think that's not a good, and this is really
Agreed.
Just for the reason that I don't know half as much about, when I was my first World Cup with the German team, I knew nothing about, the athletes had to explain everything, the rules, everything to me, and this stayed like this. I didn't know any holds, and I was also really arrogant, plastic walls for plastic people. The real climbing is done on rock, so and basically it stays like this. I expect just reading the problem, knowing what to do. I expect the athlete to know better than I do. So even if I explicitly coaching, what I think do really often is they try, and then they leave something on the table, and something is not considered. They never really shift their, because, for example, these L-shaped moves, they happen really often, and a lot can go wrong. It's just human nature that you go for a hold diagonally, what we said, your hand and you go the direct line. But now in the modern climbing, there's a lot of, you have to shift your center of gravity, and then you step up. And of course, that can still look for the uneducated viewer. That can look like one move, but if you look what you almost have to, again, delayed gratification. You have to maybe do a little detour in your movement and stuff like this. So I'm watching, I'm observing this, and they're not trying this. Then I will point this out. I was like, you know what? I haven't seen you trying to get your butt over your foot very low and then stand up. I think I do this really often. I don't know if this is something good or so, but this is certainly where I am explicit the most, to point out what hasn't been tried, because I feel that maybe it won't happen the next session and and then 1 year passes, and the next season I'm standing there with them at the World Cup, and we still haven't practiced it.
Right.
That would be really annoying.
Yeah, and I think especially if you're working in, with individual athletes, and you understand that this person is better at taking that solution and then trying to understand why the solution worked and then exploring that solution further, whereas this person is more like, okay, that's the solution, now I move on. And maybe that person is the one you shouldn't be giving the solution to, whereas this one you can, because they're going to explore and understand it better.
Yes, but I'm also, absolutely. And even more, I also consider how likely it is. Is this a good strategy for this person? Like if somebody really, there's a huge difference between practice and performance.
Performance, absolutely.
Then of course I would be even more hesitant to providing solution, because I know maybe they solve this problem that they are dealing with right now, but it's not applicable, especially under stress. Then I focus much more on trying to stress-proof their ways, make them more resilient. And because I know, like it's just one stupid boulder problem that you, or even a rock climb, you achieve. That might be for the person, it might be super important, but for me as a coach, if I'm honest, I couldn't care less. Of course, I'm really happy if there is a success, but I'm more happy for this person, because I know that how important this is for them. I'm almost a little bit too old to be really this and this title, because I know so many successful athletes, and if you're my or even your age, that's just a small part of your life.
Right. You mentioned a few minutes ago that you video most of your sessions, and you've been collecting video since the 1990s. And, I've used so much of your video in my own research and in my own learning, even for my history podcast, as well as for my coaching. So you have this massive archive, and you've said it's, one of the only places in your life that you're really organized is with your video. I think video can be a massive benefit, but it can also end up being a crutch for athletes who haven't developed awareness on the wall. So I'm curious how you use it in your coaching, in terms of how much are you interacting with the athlete over video? Are you letting them see the video and talking?
Yeah, I almost ideally they record their own video and I never see it really. Or I like to see the performance videos, to see where things were maybe not going so well, if I couldn't be there, like their body language and also the time management, the cognitive factors, even more than just like technical. Yeah, but it could be also as technical skills, like for the competition climbing is, the risk scale, for example, the element of risk, which of course there is no risk climbing 4 meters over a thick mat, but it's the perceived risk. It's about doing maybe a foot swap when you're really stressed out and you know that will be your last attempt. This is when this is risk in competition climbing, and this you need to see this. And it needs to be recorded, and it needs to be considered, and it needs to be worked on. But I'm certainly, again, I like. It's really uncomfortable for me to even with a 12-year-old, going back to who am I to tell this girl how to do things. I'm really happy if they watch it themselves, and that's good enough almost. And because I see, like when we're talking about like this positive bias, there's also there are actually a lot of athletes who really feel uncomfortable to record themselves because they're almost afraid of the truth that it will reveal. It sounds a little bit mean, but I know
I've seen it for sure.
Yes, and so they don't. And so, for some tragic reason, their phone is always empty. They're out of battery, out of space. So they do a session. They tell you, the session was fantastic, it was so much fun, And then, but there's it's all lost. So if there's no video, it didn't happen.
Yep. Nate and I just put out an episode for our patrons talking about video analysis and how a lot of the most important parts happen in between the boulders. How are you approaching it? What's your attitude when you fall off? Do you go look at the holds? Do you just sit down and turn away and not watch the next person trying it? We want to see those things as much as you climbing on the boulders.
Just one example along those lines, how ridiculous and trivial this might be. Like a climber falls off and looks into his or her hands. What is this for? What are you
That happens every single time I fall off of anything, Udo.
Yes, but why? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but exactly why are you doing this? And
I have no idea why I do it.
I would think, okay, I would have my theories.
I think I'm looking for something to blame.
And maybe if there's an audience, you would be a competing athlete. Now I see you almost never do this without an audience, but if you're in trouble, you do this with an audience. It's not only for something for you to blame, but also to show people, because this means I have this tragic case of wet skin, totally unexpected. And I'm also like after every failed attempt, I look into my hands in disbelief,
why did you fail me, skin?
Exactly. And I know actually many, even successful athletes. And as soon as they start doing this, that won't be a good competition for them. I mean, this is how video analysis, we think about like really this pseudo biomechanics that basically at this point are impossible in climbing, to really make educated guesses about. Like Rob Gray just recently did a thing about video analysis and in tennis, which is a lot easier to do than in climbing because you have no obstruction with the wall. You can go like all around. And so, he found that, or like, I think it was a meta-analysis of umbrella analysis. And apparently like the coach's eye is really good. It does the job and a lot better for the time being, a lot better than any sophisticated video. Like especially now.
I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah. And so, but again, for me, it can be you looking in your at your hands after a failed attempt. No, that could be more revealing than
for sure. There's a photo I use all the time for our skincare products, like our finger files and things. And it's a photo someone took of me after I'd fallen off of a boulder, and I'm just standing there staring at my hands as if they were the problem.
Yeah, it makes a good photo, and it's very understandable, But then you're also like, but you're also, I mean. You're climbing for different reasons. You're not 16 and your whole universe cycles around like climbing better at competitions. Like in a way you can look at whatever of course, you're free to do whatever you want. But it's like coaching for performance sports is about priorities. And if I see you spending a lot of time looking at your skin, like maybe we talk about those priorities of yours.
Yeah, absolutely. On the subject of video, with the more boring air quotes parts of the video being so important, I think you're someone who does a good job of posting video to show movement concepts. But I'm curious, are you ever conflicted about showing all these small differences in a single instance video, comparing a failure and a success, knowing that there are so many solutions that could be possible, and it's hard to tell all of this in one video. So I'm curious if you're ever conflicted.
This for sure, and also make it relatable on social media. That's another thing, like it has to be somehow relatable. And I must really admit, like often I watch comp in real time, and I think, this would be a nice example for this and this and this, and then I put it in the timeline in the video editor, and sometimes it even proves basically the opposite of what I had in mind, in terms of what the successful or what the more promising strategy might be. So very often I'm wrong with it, and this is also why I'm doing this, because I so many times that my real time perception fooled me and misguided me, and then if I look frame by frame, it might be the opposite. There was one example. For example, like with pivot moves, and then the climber steps out and stops the pivot, and that looks like a good idea because maybe you get some weight on the wall, and that would maybe help you. But often it basically kills the pivot. And I had one occasion, I did a video, and I was looking at this footage for month after month, for at least 3 months of daily watching this footage. And I always was like, this is such a fantastic example how to do this move. And then I somehow lost track of Tomoa doing the same move, and he fully pivots, and it's much better. So basically, what I thought just a second, and this happens to me in competitions all the time. Like if okay, this is really like, even with how the athletes will perform, I think I know my athletes, and then. But for some reason, they're in a really good spot, or they're really annoyed, or they have nothing to lose. Then they have a clutch performance, and everything you thought you knew about this person needs to be evaluated. But on the other, so in this respect, I'm very often I struggle and I'm uncertain. But for example, when Natalia and Brooke won in Vail, I don't know. Maybe Natalia, or maybe I don't know. It was the last problem, and it was about only those two girls were stepping through, were flagging, and it was about basically bilateral integration, if you want to call it like this. Also, something I look for, like our body. The right part of your body is controlled by the left side of the brain, and all the trouble all the problems this causes. This is very often a cause for not fantastic climbing performance. And so I saw this, and then but I didn't know what the other girls tried, or if they had even been there. And then I watched it, and it was basically it comes out that Jessie Pills and Franziska Sterr, the two Austrian girls who also arrived there, just weren't capable of stepping through, because for our brain is a lot harder to do. And then I put this as a video, and it was a really successful video in terms of how often it has been watched. But I'm afraid not many people really get the implications. But in my mind, this is, for example, this is one of the key elements that if you're not omnidextrous, it's really hard. Like with a video, I found so many like things that can't be useful. Like, for example, you're always going to the hold with your right hand, if right is your dominant side, even if it doesn't make sense, but the dominant hand just wants to touch.
Right.
First, this, for example, is something I have like hours and hours of video examples that show what an issue, what a big issue this is.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah.
Before we go, I have a couple of questions that I just would love to know your answer to. I am a big proponent of asking even adult outdoor rock climbers to try the comp boulders in the gym, for the sake of variability, adaptability. I think there's something to learn there. And most outdoor rock climbers are going to say, that has nothing to do with rock climbing. I'm not touching those. And I'm curious your thoughts there.
Okay, that has many levels. Like, first of all, like, what kind of rock climbing are you actually talking about?
And I think that's a key question there,
yes,
right?
Yes, because changing corners could be a World Cup boulder problem, right?
Absolutely.
Now, even the Great Roof could be like, what a nightmare that would be in the World Cup. Like against the underclings. And there's so many in tread climbing. There's so much funkiness, And then also, but I think the point most people that argue like this are struggling is the commitment, because like the rock climb, they hang on, they're rather, you can, this is also where the illusion of just being stronger comes from in my mind, is this like, that feels really, you need to put yourself on the line and you need to jump off, or at least you have to be really energetic. And there's also no way back. This is probably the biggest issue. You're fully committed, and so
I think that's a really interesting part of it. And there, like the commitment, the anxiety, the decision making, the discomfort. I think all of that is so important for climbing better on rock, even if it's just a crimp ladder. I think you're going to be stepping on tiny little feet that make you anxious, and you're going to have to do a move you can't reverse, and that commitment comes into play.
This is what I meant at the beginning. Like, if you look at Alex Megos, and Alex Megos has joined quite a lot of our camps, and like he's so fast. The dude is so fast, and it's incredible how fast these guys can climb. Also Jakob Schubert, and so I mean, even if you take 2 grades or whatever, like adjusted to your climbing ability. Like if you have 14A, you did a lot of 14As. I would wonder if you could climb as swiftly and precisely your 14A as Adam Ondra can climb his 15. I don't know where are they, 15D
now.
I think, like, even if we would put now, it would be a route, and yours. I don't want to put you on the spot, but now that would be like 14A, but it's the same style. You will see that these guys are faster, more precise. And
for sure.
Okay, how did they get there? They got there by, for example, leaving the comfort zone, and climbing under these time constraints, and no, it's because of that. No, so if somebody tells me that they don't, it has nothing to do with. I mean, fair enough. If you have a full-time job and climbing is your hobby, why should you even want to get out of your comfort zone? But if you still have some goals, that might be a little bit ambitious at the moment, then certainly everybody would benefit from it.
Yeah, I think so too. Last question here. You may not be able to answer this, but we all want the answer, and that's, what's the secret of the Japanese team? Like, other teams are definitely catching up, but it seems like if we go all the way back to Yuji and Dai, you don't think they're catching up.
No. Who's catching up?
Awesome.
No, they're not catching. No. If you look, I just recently rewatched the Youth World Championships in Seoul last year, and nobody's catching up. No. Like the French have the best system, like federation wise, and they're doing really a fantastic job. And so I would argue maybe the French girls in general, the level, especially with females, is really high in France, and the likeliness that you get like when you're 6 years old, when you typically start climbing nowadays, it's more likely that you find a good coach, a competent coach in Japan or in France or in Slovenia than it is in some other countries. But just in terms of movement and so
what's the secret?
Okay, a big part is certainly, that might be disappointing. A certain part is really like the attitude, and also especially that big egos. I just recently saw the quote: "It's really hard to move under a big ego." And this is something that's really frowned upon in Japan. And it has many implications. For example, the coachability of a Japanese climber is just that they're really curious and they're authentic. They're not just playing curious. There's much more curiosity, and so again, like the ego is not so. Like if I propose something to a young athlete, and this person feels that he or she has to defend themselves, that's a little bit that takes a little bit longer than it is if this person is like yes, and then you does immediately a couple of hundred attempts with a new idea. So that is a big part of it. Huge part. And I think, like, even what we talked about, like delay gratification, or if, for example, if you move from the hip, like proximal to distal, that automatically means that you can delay gratification, because you have, it's a little bit like if you set yourself up in a chess game, you have to do really boring, nobody understands. It's very unglamorous, there's nothing great about it, but then your opponent cannot move anymore, and then you win, and it's a little bit like in climbing also, like if you set yourself up at that, like for example, Tomoa, the beauty or the fascinating thing about Tomoa's climbing is not the actual move, is how the work is done almost when after he set himself up. And then he's almost climbing like a flea, like the fleas don't use the power. They use the power to basically contract the limbs, but then once it's released, it's there's basically like a ratch, how you call it, like there's a catch, and then it's release, and then the fleas spring. And this is very much like what Tomoa climbs. So in a way, I see this related. Of course, they have
he's doing all the work on the front end, and then the move works.
Especially if it comes to the hip or so, this is just something you need to. And then also like if you think of the 10-year-old Tomoa when he was still a gymnast, for example, I'm sure that it was not cool, like for him to show off and do like one-arm pull-ups. Like there would be more like, okay, maybe he never got into the position where anybody would see him even doing one-arm pull-ups, because like all the training was manipulating the hip, again, constraints-led approach. Maybe they did a lot of, or I'm sure they did a lot of this work. Make them good movers, but not in talking about it so much, but just constraining them. For example, you can. What's really fun as an example for that, you can, if you're sitting on your butt, and like basically, I don't know what the position is called, like. Yeah, you're just sitting on your butt, and then you raise each other, just moving on your hip, on your pelvis bones, on your sitting bones. Yeah, so basically, it's a really good exercise for your pelvis, for your hip region, anyhow. But then you can do a fun race, like it's super awkward if you like some people. If you haven't done this, it's really like even. Coordinating this movement. So you have a really fun basic exercise that you can iterate many times, but the young Tomoa would be busy with doing games around racing each other or chasing each other just on the hip bones.
Right.
Now, and so basically and this was a thing. So he's fast forward 15 years later. Everybody wonders why this guy moves so well from the hips. And this is what our training should consider. Like what are the skills that are really? I know that this alone is not attractive for a young person, but maybe we find a nice narrative or a challenging situation that they enjoy exploring this.
I agree totally. That's really fascinating, and the ego being taken out of their learning to move, I think, is a really, really important part that I hadn't considered too much. I think especially in America, we have this idea that Tomoa's like brooding look, is because of his ego or something. We've judged the book by its cover, and I remember a situation in Vail. I was there to MC the World Cup, and we were in the grocery store. I was there with my wife, and the Japanese team is in there grocery shopping, and Tomoa and Akio are standing over here, and I went over to them and just said, "Hey, I'm emceeing the event. Good luck tomorrow. I'm excited to watch." And Tomoa was very nice and very gracious. But my wife, when I walked back over to her, was like, "Did you just talk to him? I would be so scared to talk to him."
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because of the way he's always sort of brooding, and it just goes to show, that's not our. Just because we've got this idea of a thing and we think we know about the thing, doesn't mean anything.
No, because Tomoa is really like the first time I saw Tomoa, Akio was visiting in Cologne, and I thought it's just a visit. But in the evening, she asked me if I could do a training for them, and she was in company with this kid I haven't seen, and he was just, I think, in his last season at the juniors. He was 12th in the youth world in Arco. So not really fantastic. And he also at that same, but probably your wife was sensing, like the same kind of, like it's kind of mysterious, but definitely not very talkative or like ready for communication. Not a person you would approach. And then we planned some things with them, and the next morning we had like the hardest challenge we had for them. Tomoa flashed. And the guy is, I think he's so humble, but honestly, like authentically, that these that is just projection that we somehow think they must be arrogant or big egos, but in fact is almost the opposite. Like especially the Japanese athletes are really, they're so aware of their weaknesses. Because with this much of competition, you blink one time and 10 other boys are in front of you, even if you're Tomoa Narasaki.
Right. Totally. Well, Udo, I appreciate you taking all this time to chat with me. I would love to do this again sometime. I've spent so much time learning from you and looking at the resources you have on the internet, and I'll make sure to link to lots of those in the show notes for people. But thank you so much.
Cool, Chris. It was a pleasure. Yeah. Hope to see you soon.
I really love that Udo is always exploring and looking for interesting and engaging ways to make climbers better. Something that's sorely lacking, in my opinion, in today's world that's ruled by optimization. And it occurs to me that the same conundrum Udo faced back in the early 90s when Dale suggested that he should write about what people wanted to read still exists. And I know that I could get a lot more listens by talking only about finger strength and power, but those just aren't the only important topics, and someone has to make sure the dots get connected. I'm glad there are coaches like Udo out there helping to connect those dots. Udo has a lot of resources out there, so if you're interested in learning more, his various books and on-demand video series are fantastic. All of that is at udini.com. That's UDINI.com. That link is there in your show notes, where you'll also find links to all of the things we mentioned in the episode, as well as related episodes and articles from our website. If you're a climbing coach, or you're interested in better ways to teach this type of learning, my course, Coaching for Mastery, Building an Effective Climbing Practice, might just be perfect for you. That link is there in your show notes as well. We are a couple of months into our multi-month exploration of how we learn to better move as climbers across the podcast, YouTube, Instagram, blogs, everywhere. We're going deep, and I'll be collecting and connecting all of the dots in our monthly educational newsletter, The Current. So if you aren't subscribed already, you know where that link is. And of course, you can find us at powercompanyclimbing.com, where we've got training plans, courses, articles, and products that can help us all learn, grow, and excel.
This time,